Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Traxion Podcast, where today we'll be looking at why Assetto Corsa Competizione is one of the most popular sim racers on the market today. My name is John Munro, and joining me on the show, we have a man whose name doesn't need to be written in Italian in order for it to sound cool. It's Tom Harrison-Lord. How's it going today, Tom?
Thank you very much. Very well, thanks. How are you? Very unfortunate surname, but...
I don't think so.
That's just how it is. It could be worse. It could be spelled Competizione, and no one knows ever how to spell it when writing it down.
Yeah, well, we'll maybe come to that at the end. We'll have to wait and see. But yeah, so the reason we asked this question, Tom, is, of course, as you well know, because you're the one who sent me this stat, according to official Steam charts over the past 3 months, Assetto Corsa Competizione has actually been played by 4 times as many people per day than the likes of rFactor 2 and Race Room. And that's even double as many as, Dirt Rally 2.0, which is still a really popular game as well. I mean, that's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been out for quite a while. Obviously, there's been some recent DLC, which we'll touch on later. But clearly, there's something about this game that keeps players coming back for more. And I'm sure, again, we'll go through each element as we go through. But even if you look at Google Trends, because, of course, Steam chart data doesn't show things necessarily like iRacing, and also it completely excludes console players, of which are available for this particular game and for Dirt Rally. And even when you do that, which is a number of people searching online for the game over the past 12 months, it's right up there, and it's still very, very popular and not too far below when it initially came out.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you listening to the podcast who maybe don't play this game, or I mean, obviously we're focusing on one particular game for this episode, We should give a little bit of context. So what you might be asking, what is Assetto Corsa Competizione? Well, we're just call it ACC from now on as well, because I know most people that play the game refer to it as ACC. We should just clarify that so we're not confusing anyone. ACC is much less of a mouthful, even though it doesn't sound quite as cool. Yeah, this game is basically it's a GT racing game based on the Blancpain GT series, which is now called GT World Challenge, and of course it's officially licensed. This means you've got all the official cars, drivers, liveries and tracks from the official series, which, to be honest, Tom, nowadays when it comes to household sim racing titles, that kind of connection with a real life series is quite rare. You've obviously got the likes of F1 and stuff and WRC, which have their official licensing, but generally sims tend to focus on a bunch of different disciplines.
Right, yeah. So as you mentioned, the other sims at the start of the episode, they cover all sorts of different types of cars and tracks all around the world, whereas this is just focusing as an official game of the series. I think one reason, weirdly, how most people don't realize that is because it's not named, the official game of the GT World Challenge Series, Europe, Asia, Americas. That's such a confusing name for a race series, by the way. It's got this Italian name and with some GT cars that are in pretty much every other racing game that's comparable anyway. So maybe it's almost sneaking it under the radar, because you mentioned F1 and WRC there and even NASCAR. Those are much more popular sports in general with bigger audiences. And this is much more niche in terms of the number of people who watch it and visit the racetracks to spectate when that's allowed. And so the way they've gone around it, I think, is maybe, right, okay, well, we'll call it with the Assetto Corsa name somewhere in there, which is already recognised, and it bleeds into that, I think. Also should be noticed that Assetto Corsa Competizione, as you said, we'll call it ACC from this point on. If you literally translate that into English, it's race trim competition. So maybe I should call it that from now on. Well, we'll see.
It sounds quite close to Race 07, race trim competition.
Oh, yeah, true.
I quite like that. It. It could work, but it's not quite as cool. No. When you take away the Italian.
In Italian. Yeah.
That's it. All the corners of all the circuits sound way better in Italian, but that's another episode. So, of course, when you look at the examples of games that are focused on one particular discipline, you have, F1 2021, which is, of course, called Formula One. You've got WRC 8, which is called WRC. So the name of the series, NASCAR Heat, is actually in the game, which is, of course, as you say, not the case with this particular title. So maybe it's a bit more clear normally, but with this one, it's a little bit different. But once you know about the game, it's not really a problem. It's just a fantastic example. But we will come on to that, of course. We should probably go back to the beginning. Where did this game start? Now, a lot of people assume that Assetto Corsa Competizione is kind of the natural sequel, if you like, to Assetto Corsa, but it's not necessarily that simple, to be honest, is it, Tom?
Yeah, it's not a direct sequel, as you say. Just rewinding the clock a few years before, there was Assetto Corsa, not Assetto Corsa Competizione, and it had loads of different vehicles in it, from classic single-seater racing cars to the GT racing cars, the GT3 class, for example. But it also had a load of road cars. The tracks were really varied. There was some fictional ones. There was the Nordschleife, for example. And it wasn't particularly focused on one series. So I would say ACC is a successor, but not a sequel, because it's using a lot of the same technology and building upon it. And certainly with the GT cars, you can still, if you play them both in both games, you can feel a similarity there. But this is clearly a more laser-focused, targeted game at one particular series, and therefore not a sequel.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems to be that, with a lot of these games, they're either yearly releases or they focus on the year of sport that they were released.
Right.
The nice thing about this game is kind of in a, I guess, different sense to the likes of Formula One and maybe closer to your regular sims like your iRacing or your AC. This game kind of develops with the years. So they do add content, and even though it sticks to being, I can never remember the name of the series, GT World Challenge series stuff, they add to it year on year. So you can, 2017 and 18, they had their new packs for their Intercontinental GT packs. They're, each year of the actual GT World Challenge. We then, of course, had GT4s added recently. It's actually been quite a while now that GT4s have been out. It feels like yesterday. Yeah. Your 2020 GT World Challenge pack recently, and of course British GT. So they added British GT circuits because it's all part of the same organizing series. So it's kind of got that feel of like a normal sim like iRacing or AC would have, where it develops over time, but it's staying true to its roots. So that's kind of, in some ways, I guess that makes it a little bit unique.
Yeah, true, because like as you say there, it could easily be a yearly release with the new cars, the new tracks, but they're doing the DLC route, and also there have been some free updates. And just rewinding a little bit, it first came to early access in 2018, so it's been 3 years of constant development. And it was only just at the time of recording last month when the British GT DLC and add-on, which was new cars and new tracks, or primarily new liveries and new tracks, shall I say, came to the console versions. So it's not just on PC, it's on Xbox One and PS4 as well. And they've now finally got DLC parity across all the platforms. I suppose this is a conversation for another time, but I suppose it's, well, what happens next? We'll have an article coming soon about that on the Traxion website. And it's just been really enjoyable to see this progression over 3 years as opposed to just a yearly release.
I totally agree. I don't think, when you talk about the console versions, I'm not sure they've necessarily nailed it with the they didn't from the start anyway. I know there was quite a few issues with the console versions when they first came out. I think you probably know more about those than me. I've not actually played the console version myself, but I know you've had some issues with it, to say the least.
Yeah, so when it first came out, the online for me was completely broken. When you load like a early access PC sim game, it's fine if there's no buttons assigned for when you first launch the game, but not so much when it's a console release coming a couple of years later. That sort of audience won't necessarily stand for that. The frame rates are lower, which is fine, but the worst thing was they were completely unstable and all over the shop, and it doesn't look as nice. Now, again, going back to our point, what we just said earlier, dramatically improved over the recent years. All the DLCs in there now. The handling from day one has always been as good as the same as the PC version. So that amazing racing feeling and the AI and the wet weather, that's all in there. And now if you have a new gen system, it has a solid 60 frames per second gameplay. So the only thing now I would say is the replays are a bit choppy, and just generally there's not quite the visual fidelity of the PC version. If you're running a high-end PC, it's probably on a mid-spec PC level at the minute. Which is fine. So it's really improved. I do recommend people going back to it. I think the main point I'd like to say about this is hats off for bringing a quote-unquote hardcore sim to a console audience. And the first Assetto Corsa game proved that there is an audience for that. Just because you don't have a expensive PC doesn't mean you don't want to play a serious game. So I would say congratulations to that. Kunos.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that, especially when you're looking at console sims and stuff, that the main thing you need to get right is the frame rate with sim racing, I think, on a console, because and with a lot of games running at lower FPS, something, the more FPS you have on PC, the better the experience, right? So people tend to, you'd rather have a higher FPS and a lower quality than a higher quality low FPS, because every single movement of the steering wheel of the inputs count. So therefore, when it comes to console gaming, you kind of need that. And I think even though the visuals and stuff on ACC weren't the best to start with, and they did have some problems with the frame rate initially, the main thing is that there's a stable sim, even if it doesn't look quite as good, as you say, that actually works. And I think that's a hugely important move for the industry, because we always talk about the split between sim and PC and console gaming, and I think it's hugely important. I mean, would you say the console version let down the PC at the start, or would you say we'd just ignore that and say well done for actually doing it?
No, I just think now well done for doing it. Well done for sticking on it. They could have just left it. It also came at a weird time. It's like there's no native next gen version, but that is coming later this year.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. So then, like, the frame rate's fine now. The gameplay's great. The online, everything is there. But there's a few extra, like, camera angles and replay features on the PC version, and there's also just generally richer visuals in terms of the lighting in particular. And so that will come later this year. And then for PS5 and Xbox Series price, you should hopefully have parity with because the game is quite power intensive on PC, right? So it could be one to watch, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really keen to give the next gen version a try. I don't know, it could kind of bridge that gap between the console version and the PC version. Will it? I mean, it could even trump the PC version. I doubt it, but
we'll see.
We'll see.
On that point, like, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but it depends on each individual's PC specs.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
So it could trump most people's. We'll have to see.
That's important though as well, because when you look at the price point for a PlayStation 5, you're not looking at a top end PC.
Yeah. And just it's great. Assetto Corsa Competizione is coming to those devices. But anyway, it's available for everybody, and it's a hardcore sim, and it's been successful. So.
Yes. Well done. Well done to the developers. Round of applause, because it's so important. And speaking of applause for the developers, I do want to bring the discussion onto some of the gameplay itself. Yeah. Now, this handling model in Assetto Corsa Competizione, now not everybody fully agrees with this, but generally speaking, there's a hugely amount of positive feedback when it comes to the handling of ACC. Whether it's down to the way that the curbs feel, the intricacies in the force feedback, every single, you can feel every single difference in limit of the car, whether it's under braking, under acceleration, when the back end's sliding. There's so much feeling through the wheel. It's something to behold, really. I mean, it's taken sim racing a long time to come from a kind of game that they call a sim, but is actually arcade, to something that we can actually say is realistic. But playing Assetto Corsa Competizione for the first time is an experience. It does bring you closer to what you might expect to feel when you're actually driving a real GT car.
Right. And a part of me thinks that a good reason why it feels so great and why the handling is so good is that KUNOS-Simulazioni, who produced this game and create this game, they do a lot of behind the scenes B2B work with car manufacturers. They have Assetto Corsa Pro, which is like a €3,000 game, and then this is used for driver training and race team simulations in the background. And so Assetto Corsa Competizione takes that technology and wraps a video game around it. I know calling a simulation a video game is a awkward thing, but ultimately you can play online against rivals and you can play against the AI, so it's a game. And it's a really clever use of this hardcore simulation technology in a more accessible fashion. And then the second thing I'd like to say is, on this point, the handling, for me, my personal opinion, is the crucial thing of a video game. If it looks good and plays great and has all these online modes, if it doesn't drive very well, you're probably not going to come back to it. So here they've focused, for me, on this first, and it goes back to like the tire model, how it handles curbs, all these things that lots of little things that make the game feel really satisfying to drive.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the detailing of the advanced physics, that make things like, as you say, that you mentioned the tire model there. I think I've never seen a tire model that when you go out on circuit to set up a car, you really need to think about everything from all of the pressures and temperatures, the track temp, the air temp, all of these things. The wind can affect the way the tires behave. You have your optimum tire pressure window you need to find if you want to be really on the edge of speed. I mean, okay, this is not things that every gamer will of course think about too much. A lot of people will shove it on the default aggressive setup and away you go.
Yeah.
When you start taking it seriously, you can really turn this into a properly serious sim, with engineers looking at, okay, well, we increase the tire pressures by 0.2 psi every time the track drops by 3 degrees. Like that's definitely something that happens, and I'm pretty sure everybody does that in a high level sense when you're racing on ACC. And I think that the way that this affects the feeling of the car, the understeer when you've got a crosswind, all those kind of things, and the oversteer when it's coming the other way, it's just phenomenal. I think the thing I was bang on about with ACC is attention to detail. They seem to be second to none when it comes to the attention to detail. And that's not just in the handling, to be fair. It's in the sounds. It's in the way everything feels, the curb rumbles, the little things in between, the pit stops and all that. I think that it's really hard to find a game that has just a better attention to detail right on the edge, where the things that most people won't even think about.
Yeah, we'll go into it later. There's loads of elements for the detail. It's so precise and well recreated. But just on your point, John, for those who don't know, races in this, in leagues and esports series using this title, right? So he's the man. and he does all the tire pressures and the brake ducting and the damper rebound set, all this good stuff. But if you're not into that so much, it's still great and still feels amazing when you just go to the track for the first time. Now, I would caveat with there is a learning curve, but the learning curve is what is perhaps giving this game not a second life, but an elongated life, because there's a learning curve of learning all the cars and tracks. Then there's some new ones that come out, so you're learning all those. Then you want to try and take it online. You might want to finish a single-player career, but then you might want to get into tire pressures. Then you might want to get into your brake temperatures, and it just goes on and on and on because you're constantly trying to be better. So that's a big appeal to it. And another element of it is, even if you've got like a cheap used Logitech wheel, the force feedback is set up perfectly from almost perfectly from day one, I think. I mean, certainly I haven't. I'm sure you can get into the settings, but I haven't even had to change anything to get a good out of the box in terms of the feedback. If you think about the Formula One games, and if you use the cheap Logitech wheel, they have this rattle and you can hear it. And Assetto Corsa Competizione doesn't do that from the off. So that's a big bonus.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head there with accessibility as well. I use Logitech equipment with Assetto Corsa Competizione. That's the wheel I've used for the past year or so. And you can be as quick on a Logitech as you can on high-end equipment. Okay, maybe it will cost you a few tenths at the top end, but I think the difference between good equipment and average equipment is much smaller on Assetto Corsa Competizione than it is on something like iRacing. And part of it's down to the nature of the cars, to be fair. When you hit the brake pedal in these GT3 cars, you're pretty much stamping on the pedal, right? You're going for as much pressure as possible. You've got your ABS kicking in, so therefore having a brake pedal with a lot of feeling in it is not going to make too much of a difference. You can use a cheap set of pedals with not much resistance and still brake fairly consistently. But as you say, the straight out of the box with the force feedback, the steering feels good, even on a cheaper end, budget end wheel. It's still not cheap, but you can basically be competitive with any equipment. Whereas other games, you need the direct drive to find the extra second at the end, whether that's pedals or wheels. And I'm sure that's another topic to debate, but generally speaking, it's a lot more accessible. One thing also I would mention, I did play this game on a keyboard and a controller in one of the Traxion videos we had on the channel a month or so ago, and I was amazed by how close I could actually get with the controller. So this game, you don't need a wheel to enjoy this game. You go out there on a controller, it maybe takes a little bit more adjustment to the settings, but you can actually really enjoy it as well. And the AI are so good to race that you don't need to be in a sim setting to enjoy this game, even though it's based on simulation physics.
Didn't you see someone do well in an esports competition and they were using a controller or a gamepad recently?
Absolutely. That's what inspired the video. So I was watching an endurance race in a very high level league, and there was someone running in the top 10 in the wet at Snetterton of all places using a controller.
Right, in the rain.
And it shows you it's possible. You can be that competitive. I don't think you could do that with many other high-level sims.
I agree, and it shows that the developer has thought about this audience. We're going back to, they've released it on PS4 and Xbox One. They've also worked on the controller, so it's trying to get this very, very serious game that's laser targeted and has got the most incredible attention to detail ever. But it works on a controller, works on a console, and that's another reason why it's got this big appeal at the minute.
Now, another key point worth mentioning when it comes to attention to detail is, of course, the circuits. Now, these circuits are all laser scanned, which is even just that phrase on its own sounds exciting. It's like, oh, wow, lasers, great. But what does that actually mean? What it means is we get circuits that are realistic to real life. They act in a similar way. They have the same bumps, same curbs, and also the feeling that this game gives you over those curbs, whether it's the rumble of a particular exit curb or a sausage curb throwing you up in the air, and the way the suspension reacts, just the attention to detail through the tracks really kind of brings the best out of the cars, I would say.
Yeah, there's a few terms in gaming like frame rate or HDR and laser scanning is one of them where, if it's not laser scanned, that's rubbish. I think there's laser scanning and there's laser scanning, and Assetto Corsa Competizione, however they interpret that data that's been scanned, is the best at the minute in terms of the track detail, right? Every little tiny little bump and undulation and piece of grass or runoff area or pit entry seems to be the closest I've experienced in a game or sim of any description. And that really adds the sense of immersion of, I'm really there. I'm at Donington Park. I'm at Paul Ricard. Not that anyone really wants to be. So that is such a big thing, and combining that with the suspension and the tire model just gives you this oh wow, I'm as close as I can get to driving this car.
Absolutely, and the sound really did it for me as well. FMod have done an incredible job on the sound, and I come back to it, whether it's the gravel rash, going off the circuit into the gravel, the noise is so loud, and that is something very familiar to me in a real race car because I've been in the gravel plenty of times, and the fact that it takes a little bit of time to get back to being okay. As I say, the curb rumble, I keep coming back to it, but that was the reason I keep coming back to curbs is because it was the first time I really noticed the attention to detail of this game when I was first playing it. I'm like, wow, the sound of these curbs, the feel of these curbs, the way it affects the car. That was when it kind of clicked with me just how good this really was. So I think a huge amount of credit to everyone involved. Obviously, the specific people and organizations involved in actually providing these sounds and feelings and the tracks and stuff. But actually, for whoever put them all together and made this work collaboratively, I should say, deserves a huge amount of credit.
Right, and oh man, I feel like we've focused a lot on curbs, but to continue that theme, it's not just a rumble. When you go over them, it feels like the sensation is going over the ridges, and that's the really clever key bit and small thing that a lot of games overlook and don't have enough detail on. That just makes this feel like a little step above a lot of other titles that are out there. And you've also mentioned the sound. I would also like to shout out to the car recreations. There are games out there that do look better and have a bit more detail on the vehicles. That's for certain, but Assetto Corsa Competizione looks really good, but has detail in other ways. For example, when you're on the inboard camera, the point of view, which is adjustable, it seems to be really well thought through. The driver then presses the ignition on, then you press the starter, then you've got to get it into gear, and all that cool stuff is a bit confusing when you first boot the game, but it's just that little extra, ooh, I'm actually in a real race car.
No, I totally agree. I totally agree. It's just, as an all-round package, it's fantastic. I'm sure that's one of the main appeals for people actually, getting involved with this game and playing it. Yeah. One thing I would say, to get to the limits of the game, and we did kind of touch on it earlier, there is a lot to take in. If you really want to get the most out of it, there's so much with the car setup. It's not straightforward. There's a lot of different aspects to it. It took me ages to try and grasp it, and even then, I'm not an expert on it. I know how each thing works now, but I still couldn't take a car from 0 to 100. Definitely not. I have to use, whether it's traction sources. We've got obviously our Ross is our ACC writer. He does some good stuff. He makes a lot of setups for me actually because we're teammates.
Go read those articles.
Yeah. There's so much stuff out there really that can help you with this. But would you say that makes it a little bit more difficult for your average consumer to really get the most out of?
Yeah, no, it's not so much that those setups are there, or you have to do those setups, or that you have to learn all the tracks in intricate detail, or understand which car performs better on which circuit, or any of that, of which John has made some wonderful videos on the TraxionGG YouTube channel, and like you said, Ross has written some great articles. It's the fact that the game doesn't signpost those well enough.
Yes.
It doesn't explain what they are well enough. It doesn't say, oh, go do this, or walk you through what this does. There's a whole driver rating system in there, which is you're just sort of left to yourself as to, well, why can't I join this online lobby? Oh, my rating's not high enough. But how is that compiled? All it needs is like a 2-minute little video that pops up and says, this is this rating, and this affects this, blah, blah, blah. And then when you're in the menus, if you're a pro, you can obviously skip all these or turn them off, but it would have some explanation of, oh, right, your brake ducting affects this and this. And maybe even there's like some screenshots or a video or something. I understand that people might look down upon that suggestion as, oh, well, if you don't understand that, what are you even doing racing a game like this? But even the pros sometimes need a little reminding, and if they're optional, it doesn't affect anybody other than helping more people to get competitive.
Right, that's the thing. Optional. Because I feel like what they were maybe going for was trying to make it as realistic as possible and taking that a bit too far. So, in real life, you don't really ever know exactly what the conditions are. You don't really know exactly what the track's going to be like from day to day. And, it comes back a bit to the attention to detail thing. But every time the air temperature changes, the track temperature changes, you need to change your setup. Every time the wind changes, you need to change your setup. And there's no indication as to how to do that unless you were to sit down with an engineer and practice everything, all the different scenarios, and learn what each change actually does. Now, obviously, that's phenomenal, because what it also means is when you're practicing for an online race, you never really know anyone's true pace because the conditions are always different. So And you know, in esports, that's something, and I'd say that's brilliant because you don't know how fast your competitors really are because they might have a different track conditions, and it keeps it open. Most other games don't have that. It's a set leaderboard, and everyone has the same conditions, so you really know where you stand. But as you say, have the option for people that are taking it less seriously. You know, why shouldn't people that just want to plug in and play be able to know what a player rating actually means? You know, why does it have to be a secret?
That's crazy.
I don't know if they're trying to encourage people to just drive better in the hope that they'll fix their player rating, but it frustrated me not knowing what was causing it. I actually do have an example as well before we move on. I was racing offline, making videos, and I think it was for track guides and stuff. And I was having some crashes with the AI just for fun. And I didn't realize that this affected my online ability to race in events. So I was signed up for an esports event, took to the grid, or tried to take to the grid by joining the server, and it wouldn't let me in because I didn't have the correct safety rating. But then the admins knew I was a safe driver. It was just because I'd been crashing a lot offline and didn't know how much that would affect things. So you know, it's little things like that.
Just before someone comments and says, "Well, you could turn that off." Yes, I think we know you could turn it off, but it's on by default and it doesn't tell you. That's the point.
Right. So I worked out I could turn it off after this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is it? You know, and why doesn't something say that at the start of the game, as you say?
Yeah, exactly. But the weird flip side to that is, strangely, that's part of the appeal. What we said earlier, because you do have to go dig out. You have to read the forums. You have to go on Reddit. You have to go on Traxion.GG, read one of Ross's articles, and that means you're sort of more invested in it. Or it feels like more of an accomplishment when you do succeed. Still think there needs to be work on that, though.
Absolutely. It's a compromise, isn't it? And it's as you say, why not have the option? I get the appeal, especially as someone who is racing at a kind of more serious, like an esports level rather than a gaming level, because there's that mystical feeling about it where you never really know what's going on. There's BOP changes, you can't see them anywhere, weight adjustments, all that kind of stuff. You just never really know, and it's great because it makes it unpredictable. But you know, it depends on where you stand with that one, and some people really don't care about all that kind of stuff. I mean, the main thing about this game that really appeals is how satisfying it is when you finally nail a lap. You know, when you perfect everything and you get the most out of it. You have to have earned that situation. You can't just rock up and be there. It takes almost, you could argue it takes months to really get down to it and find a lap time that suits you or that you can actually reach, because in the first place you're always a couple of seconds away and you don't really know how, and it takes learning.
Yeah, I also think on top of that, it's just a great example of when a developer is fastidious and targeted at one particular end goal and works over and above for a very, very long time on just focusing on GT3 and GT4 cars and trying to get the best representation of that. It just shows what can be done from a quality point of view and a driving feedback point of view. And it's not trying to be like the licorice all sorts of racing games, right? It's just trying to be, right, this is it. This is what we want to do. We're going to do the best possible version of that.
Absolutely.
And that to me is the main appeal for this game.
Definitely. Like, we've got our licorice all sorts games. We've got those. That
appeal. And there's a place for those, and I love them.
Yeah.
But this is just shows, right, if you don't try and compete that and do your own thing, this is the result.
Yeah, and we've got a new benchmark. We've got a new benchmark for developers to aim for, and this is what can be done if you focus on things properly, and it's shown that people will play it. You know, come back to the stat at the start. We've got a lot more people playing this on a daily basis than the likes of R-Factor 2, Race Room and stuff. So it shows that you don't have to have every car in the world to make an enjoyable game that people will play if the quality's there. So, you know, there's a message to everyone out there that, you know, it's about the quality, and I think that everyone who's played Assetto Corsa Competizione will appreciate that. Tom, spelling test, spell it for me.
Oh, right. Well, for the whole thing? A-S-S-E. Or is it double T? T-T-O, I would say.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Then C-O-R-S-A, the easy one. Right, then Competizione. C-O-M-P. I've got to close my eyes for it. E-T-I-Z-I-O-N-E.
I think so. I think you're there.
It's very easy to add an extra T into Competizione because that's how you pronounce it, right?
Yeah. It's Competizione is how it's spelled.
Yeah.
And that's why I was glad to be hosting this one, because then I could put that on you and then just move it on. So, yeah, that is going to be it for today, guys. A massive thank you to Tom, of course, for joining me. And as always, a big thank you to all of you for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe via your favorite podcast service to catch future episodes. And also join us on social media at TraxionGG for all sorts of rubbish or some good stuff as well. We share a lot of our articles and videos, but lots of memes and all sorts on there. You go and check that out. Also, you can go and see what Tom's up to at www.traxion.gg, where we've got all of the latest racing game news, reviews, articles, etc., etc. And trust me when I say that Tom and the team will absolutely have you covered when it comes to the world of racing games. In the meantime, keep it pinned. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.
See ya. Bye.